We start tonight with new details about the diver trapped in Manatee Springs.
This is just a horrific accident. A very experienced diver that just found herself in a very, very bad situation.
Drowned in the deepest site of an underwater cave, these 4 divers found themselves in their worst possible situation, and only 3 would make it back to the surface. When 4 certified divers flew from China to dive in Manatee Springs in Florida, in the US, they came without extensive planning. Their lack of foresight would ensure their trip would end in disaster when the cave suddenly and violently exploded in a surge of rainwater from nearby aquifers, trapping one of them at a dead end, and the other 3 far from any chance at help.
Min was a certified diver who came to the U.S. specifically to dive sites like Manatee Springs.
And unfortunately, it cost her life.
Traveling with temporary visas from China, the team of 4 friends, Wang Yuan, his dive partner Chen Dive, and a couple, Zhao Min and Fu Xiaoyu, wasted no time from their arrival to head straight for Manatee Springs. In spite of their cavalier attitudes, the group consisted of only experienced hands, although Wang, a diving instructor of over 500 hours, and Chen with 100 hours, were far more experienced than Fu and Min, both with only 11 hours of diving experience. Knowing this, they'd send in a reconnaissance group of Wang and Chen to scout the conditions of the caves, while Fu and Min in a second group would remain on the surface. However, while this section of their journey was routine and otherwise ordinary, by sheer ignorance, their day would gradually crumble into a hellish nightmare. Their trouble starts well before even arriving at Manatee Springs, with only one diver, Wang, having experience with the location and the only source of relevant information they'd had at their disposal. Unfortunately for them, Wang had been to the springs many years prior, and as such, many conditions had changed, and Wang, damningly, had failed to research any additional information or updates before arriving. On first glance, this would be an acceptable and unnoticeable oversight if it were not for the heavy rain that had seeped into the area from storms days prior, causing the current in the spring to grow and swell like a monstrous beast rising from a slumber and reach a strength no diver could hope to struggle through. As if that weren't bad enough, previously open tunnels had collapsed from erosion, leading the park to release a cautionary advisory for wayward divers. Wang and his team were left completely unaware of the impending disaster. Their entrance and scouting of the caves neither clued them in on the situation, nor gave them any reason to postpone their exploration. For in the 2 entrances into the cave system, Manatee Springs itself, which possessed a strong enough current to cause bubbles, and enough reason for the weary observer to question a dive, or the Catfish Hotel location, which was far calmer due to less current, with a duckweed top layer but clear water, and only a minor current beneath the surface. Continuously unaware, the scouting team would enter from Catfish Hotel and enter the tunnels leading to the underwater caverns, making their way against the much smaller and manageable current towards Friedman's Sink at 1,600 feet beneath the surface. Wang and Chen found little reason to suspect that anything could go awry. However, nonetheless traversable, despite the claustrophobic passageways and flowing current. As a result, they would continue traversing for another 35 minutes later until they reached their destination at Friedman's Sink. Once more, with no reason to suspect the worst, and an almost hour-long trip behind them, Wang and Chen deemed the dive risk worthy of exploration and met with Fu and Min back on the surface. This would ultimately prove to be their dooming decision to the point of no return. Using underwater propulsion devices, Min and Fu dove into the springs after Wang and Chen, 500 feet from the exit, coming together as a single group and compressed air levels being closely monitored. They entered the caves bound for Friedman's Sink and toward their exit out the other side. This would be where their lives would change forever. An immense buildup of water began to rush and thrash through the closely packed passages of the cave and flowed worse still from now flooding aquifers, releasing a tidal wave of current surging through their path. starting only slowly at first, gradually building up to collapse the tunnels they would need for a safe and hasty exit, then rising to an explosive, unpredictable level as the team entered Friedman's sink. Feeling the pressure of the current push down on them more and more, as they dove deeper, the group relied on Wang's leadership to swim and crawl through the rock and water. Using a pole slope, they attempted to gradually swim upward through the tunnel, almost climbing, until Wang stopped dead in his tracks. Their exit was completely blocked with debris, nothing more than a pitch-black void staring back at them, where an open tunnel to the surface had been previously. Any lesser experienced group would have readily panicked under such conditions, in the dark, paralyzed by confusion, and their only hope of escape was far from sight. Before they can communicate an exit strategy, the current now comes in full force, breaking their line of sight. The overflow now having risen to such a great strength, they were forced to swim against their own power. Even after having swam back to the primary cavern, with the slight hope of making it back to the entrance, they were tossed around like puppets in the current, helpless to the unrelenting flow of water. Wang would be the first to suffer at the hands of the almighty overflow. As he swam upstream, the water responded violently, thrusting him into a wall of the cave. Stuck and floundering, he made several attempts to overcome the current, but only ended up breaking his rebreather in two. Now unable to breathe, he quickly started to choke and panic, with no air flowing to his lungs. Having seen him struggling, Min alerted Fu, and together they attempted to swim towards Wang before he would drown, yet to no avail. Wang was on his own, and though they signaled with a light they'd find help, this attempt would also be in vain, as they were forced to swim blindly against the current. Chen, meanwhile, had been sucked through a hole with no avenue for escape, lest the current changed direction. Wang desperately tried to control his breathing through the broken rebreather, while attempting to push off against the wall. At a fever pitch, when their lives seemed to be nearing a critical point of life and death, their prayers were answered. The current at last lessened, and upon trying to rescue his trapped diving partner, the current pushed him to a shallow surface, where he could rise to the surface for a pocket of air. Temporarily, he was safe. Upon its flow redirecting upward, Wang's three colleagues caught a break. Chen, who was still trapped in the hole, was propelled out of the cave, followed by Fu. Unfortunately, as Min tried to join them, a sudden torrent of water pulled her into a nearby cavern, slamming her against its wall. The wind knocked out of her, and mind dazed. The current's grip was relentless, and despite her desperate efforts, Min couldn't break free. She struggled fiercely, weakening with each attempt. Her tenacity admirable in the face of such odds, but ultimately futile. Each time she made progress, the raging water shoved her deeper into the hole. As if to hasten her downfall, small boulders and patches of loosened rock now rocketed through the tunnel, shooting through her suit and pinning her limbs against the cavern wall. Her oxygen level plummeted, her panicked breathing quickening its depletion. If help couldn't arrive, she was doomed. Fu, realizing his wife hadn't surfaced, sprinted to call for help at the park duty station. Severely injured from his ordeal, Chen could only lie on the platform outside the cave, waiting helplessly. Wang, acknowledging the failure he'd suffered in leading his team, courageously and fearlessly, attempting to dive back in after her. However, the violent stream thwarted his every attempt. After several failed tries, he was forced to retreat, now sitting alone with his thoughts, as the three men could only wait for first responders and a diver rescue team to arrive and outwait the overflow. Meanwhile, Min remained trapped, the unrelenting current preventing any escape. Though one would wish her perilous situation had a miraculous ending, it does not. Rescue teams were still an hour away and wouldn't be able to reach her until the next morning. Min was trapped with no one to rescue her. Her air tank emptied as she struggled for her life, and her lungs went from sipping out the last of air to sucking in raging cave water. Her drowning was excruciating, her body going limp within minutes, her frightened mind being conscious for every second of it. On the surface, her husband was devastated, knowing her air would run out soon. At last, the rescue team did finally arrive, but all too late. Their team was first and foremost focused with a recovery operation rather than a rescue. All hands were experienced enough to know what had happened, even their immediate response team being beaten back by the heavy current. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't advance and had to exit the water before getting trapped themselves. 2 more attempts would end in failure, and they were forced to suspend operation until the next day. Min was lost. Monday dawned, and the underwater cave rescue recovery team made another attempt. This time, they reached Min's lifeless body. Spending several hours removing debris from over and around her body, they would gently lower her from her place, pinned to the wall. And with heavy heads and her grief-stricken husband waiting on the surface, Min was carried away. Her body would later be flown back to her home, along with her colleagues and husband, to devastated family and friends, never to return. If this story left you shocked and gripping for more, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Our next tale will be of absolute catastrophe, involving a band of high school children left in absolute peril.